The journey of like getting your first 100 customers, for example, can be a lot longer and harder than you might initially expect. Especially in spaces where
I found out an interesting pattern in the Malaysia funding data that showing that the VC funding is heavily relying on the growth stage of companies rather than the firms that in the earlier stages.
there is generally a branding problem as well to an extent about startups in Malaysia, which I don't really fully understand. But what makes you want to do this podcast?
I wanted to. So Ashvin, I'm so excited today. This is the first time we have met each other and we're doing this big stuff together. And it actually could be done 1 month before, but unfortunately the schedule get busy. But luckily we could done it today. Much appreciated. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I'm going to start the conversation from the Enter program. As you mentioned before in the previous podcast, that actually building Cliff AI is one of your startup ideas. Actually, you have plenty of startup ideas with your team once you join the Enter program. So I wish to start with the very first question with why this idea matters and why this is the right time to build it.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. When we were going through the Antler program, as you mentioned, there were like a whole bunch of different ideas that we were trying to experiment with.
Yes.
I think we always knew that we wanted to do something around media, around creators, and you can also see the general trend of growth among creators. Like the fact that we're in a podcast studio in KL. This didn't exist like 5-10 years ago. There was no such thing. Like, why would someone create an independent podcast?
Yes.
But today it's so normal, and like there are people who are like, even in this office, there are people who are YouTubers. There are people who are posting content for a living, and and just sharing videos and sharing ideas on the internet. So I think we wanted to kind of contribute to that in some way, and I think that's where Cleve was really born. And we really wanted to create useful tools for people who are like yourself, who are creating a podcast, who are building a brand and building a channel. I think it's trend-based, but also our personal interests as well for myself and my co-founders, because we were also people who were kind of nobodies, and then we just started posting content online, and that's how we started our first businesses. Right? Most of our initial clients came through, actually pretty much all of our initial clients came through organic content when we would post on LinkedIn or on Facebook and stuff like that. And we just saw the power of content creation and the life-changing capability of it. So we wanted to enable that for more people.
You have mentioned in the previous podcast before as well, right? Actually, you are running a marketing agency before starting Cliff AI. I believe that might be challenging for you since both of the job might have a same level of the intensity, but yet difference in the sense of nature of the job scope. So I wanted to ask, how do you learn new disciplines so quickly on the job?
Oh, right. I think you're right. It is very different. And you did great research on this, by the way. But yeah, like I think the learning part is the part that I've always kind of enjoyed as well. I think that's the fun part of like building businesses and like pursuing creative pursuits. I think I do think that building a business is a creative journey, right? Like if you want to pursue art, you need to learn art, right? You need to learn how to draw, you need to understand lines, colors, and then be able to create, say, visual art. Or if you want to pursue music, then there's always that kind of like learning part. But the learning is often the fun part, actually. So like, I think I've kind of always enjoyed the process of learning something new. And I think that has been similar with Cleve as well as the marketing agency. It's just about like trying to understand the business, figuring out what are the things that you need to do to set yourself up right in the business. Although it can be quite scary sometimes, because like you have to be learning quite quickly, especially in AI right now.
Yes, the learning curve will be much steeper.
The learning curve is very steep, and I wasn't someone who was like a software engineer, or like I don't have that much background in AI or in product design generally. But I think that's a part of the entrepreneurship where you just have to pick up lots of different things and try to pick it up as quickly as possible. Yeah, but then it can also be like quite fulfilling and interesting. Yeah.
I like how you put on that, because I agree that the things that we are learning now should not be equal to what we are going to do in the future, in the next 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years. Yeah. So
actually, maybe I can add one more thing on that.
Right.
Because you talked about how the things that we're learning now, like how do we know if it's relevant as well, right?
Yes.
For the future. I think right now, in this time in history, the future is less clear than it has ever been before. Like, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, like in the AI tech space especially, and the way the world is changing. So I think it's almost impossible for us to know exactly what we should be learning now to be good for the future, right? Because virtually all knowledge is going to become obsolete faster and faster, as in like whatever you learn today might not be helpful tomorrow. But one thing that I feel is important is we just stay grounded on having that spirit of learning, right? So then whatever comes in future, you can just quickly learn and adapt and become really good at learning. Yeah.
All right. Allow me to dig a little bit deeper about it. How does life change when one become a startup founder?
To be fair, I've never really worked in a corporate job.
All right.
Like ever since I started, I've always been doing startups and businesses, I guess. So I can't exactly share the experience. I can share, I guess, from university to the working world and to starting businesses. And I think when I was doing university, I think the biggest difference is the paths in university are clearer. You know, the main goal is pretty clear, like just get good grades, get a first class or 4.0 or whatever, you know. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's quite obvious what you need to do. But then in startups and in business, there's so many options. Do you want to do this business idea, that business idea? And then once you're in this business idea, should we go with this direction or that direction? There's so many different directions and potential goals. Should we use this technology or that technology? Should we hire this person or hire that person? There's so many options, right? And I think that's the difficult part, getting used to this idea that, okay, there are so many options and you need to figure out what's the best one for you. Yeah.
Understood. So a follow-up question again. Are you a kind of hustler founder that work from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m.? Do you?
Sometimes. But I think especially this year, one of the things that I'm trying to do more is like really prioritize sleep, you can still work hard and like work longer hours, but still prioritize your mental health and your sleep. Because ultimately, right, the game of running a company, hard work is important, but making good decisions is even more important a lot of times, right? And if you are not sleeping enough, which I was, right? And I was like really I was like working nonstop and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But when you're not sleeping enough, you're not exercising, you're not eating well, your brain is not performing at 110% capacity, right? Your brain is like probably at 60, 70%. So the quality of your decisions is compromised. And then I think about a year ago, or less than a year ago actually, I was waking up every day and I was like exhausted, and then I would just try to go to work and start working on things. And after a month, I would just look back at the month and I'd be like, oh shit, I didn't actually achieve anything. Right? I was working very hard. I was doing lots of things, but they were not really important things. And I think that's where like the sleep, the exercise, mental health, talking to people like your friends is really important, right?
Yeah, efficiency matters.
Yeah. So we shouldn't like hustle all the way.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually kind of misleading because you end up not making the right decisions. Yeah.
That's let me think about work-life balance should not be 50-50. It can like 60-40 or 70-30, but it can so-called work-life balance also, right?
Yeah. I think for me, I've come, like, especially this year, I've started treating it more like seasons. So sometimes I will have, like, really like work hard seasons, where I'm feeling energized and like, I've got lots of motivation. And then there are going to be some days or some weeks even when I feel down, or I feel like, I don't have that level of motivation. And in those weeks, then, maybe I would spend more time talking to friends, or connecting with my family, or like going on trips or something, or, just like things to reignite the entrepreneurship drive. Yeah.
Before we really dive into the product, I would like to discuss with you about the criticization on the generative AI, because the contents generated by the Gen AI are often considered as lack of true creativity or human intellect as well. So I would like to ask, do you see Gen AI as a tool for enhancing human writing, or it might be a potential replacement of the human writing?
Yeah, I think the more I think about it, the more I see it as really one of the best partners rather than replacement. Because it depends what you define as writing, right? In my opinion, writing is not about the actual writing itself, like the content creation or like the actual writing up the piece. It's the ideas and the things that you want to share with the world, right? So what do you even want to talk about? And what are your experiences that you want to share? I think that's actually the core part. AI can help with polishing the writing, like structuring it better, and having posts for all your different channels. But it's your ideas that matter most. And that's still extremely human, and it cannot really be done by AI because it's your experiences, it's your life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because AI just do their job, right? And then the most important thing is the meaning behind the content that we wish to share to our audience. Do you mean by that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, for example, for you, right? What makes you want to do this podcast?
I wanted to do this podcast because I feel like Malaysia need to have media exposure on the topics like startups, philosophy, tech, economics, and that feels that everyone might feel it is a very boring things to learn to, but I do think that Malaysia need to have that kind of awareness around this field, because those boring fields that I mentioned before is the one that drive the iteration of the society. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, but yeah, that core idea and that core belief that you have, and the change that you want to see in the world, like AI would not be able to just come up with this. Like, it still needs you to be driving it, right? So I think generative AI can help with like the execution of it.
Yeah.
Like, you have this vision and you need an AI tool to help you with the script writing, the preparation, the research when you're going into these podcasts. But you still choose which questions you want to ask. You still choose the final edit of the episodes. And you choose the strategy and the narrative and what kind of content you want to put out.
Yeah.
I think that's the human parts, right?
Yes, that's the parts that the mathematical modeling couldn't done it.
Yeah, exactly.
Better than the human. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. A follow-up question again. Based on the your perception about the generative AI, how do you hope your users use Cliff AI wisely?
That's a really good question. I think I hope that people use it as a tool to help bring out their ideas into the world. A lot of people have these ideas, right? They have these thoughts. They have these things that they want to change in the Malaysian media landscape, like you, right? They have things that they want to change about socioeconomic issues, about even the way marketing is done or the way sales is done or something like that, right? And they have all these ideas, but it's just really difficult to get from their head to like online and to reach thousands of people, right? And what I'm hoping with Cleave is people use it as a tool to document their real ideas and their thoughts, and then to use it as a tool to help transform those thoughts into a version that can be shared and distributed and reach thousands of people that would be impacted from those ideas. So I would encourage people to write their personal experiences, their stories into Cleave, and then use Cleave to turn those rough stories into well-written pieces that can be consumed by thousands of people. Yeah.
All right, that's cool. All right, I'm using Cliff as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would like to share my aha moment kicks in when I'm doing something that I related with. So I just quickly jot down my ideas, and I usually revisit it once I have those time to revisit it. And I would like to share it's brilliant because it's helped me to help me to spark ideas by its output, so that I can have a very clear picture about my initial thoughts. And in addition on that, I feel like it is very time consuming to figuring out the origin of my initial thoughts and have a reasoning behind my ideas as well. But Cliff AI does really help me to minimize the process.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So I do believe that other users from Cliff AI has the same thoughts as me, and Cliff AI has a very good reputation in the social media so far. But I do believe that as the number of users growing, it is very normal that receiving contrast feedback about the products. So may I ask what those contrast feedback are majority related with, and what is your consequence action corresponding to it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I think the interesting thing about you have your positive feedback and then you have your constructive feedback. I think for me as a founder, I actually love hearing the constructive feedback a lot more, because it's actually very helpful. Because it informs me and the team on what we should be doing next. So every time I see a customer service message or someone DMing me and saying like, hey, I like your product, but this is the issues that I have with it, it's actually the best message. And it's the one that me and my team discuss internally all the time. I think a big part has been figuring out how can we be the most helpful assistant to people who are creating content, to people who are building their brand. Sometimes we would do lots of different experiments. For example, we recently launched the statistics pages where you can analyze all your content within Cleave and have AI generate these reports which are super detailed about your content performance.
Yes.
And it would be great to kind of hear some of the feedback that users are saying, like, oh, I wish that this could be more in depth, or I wish that this part could be longer and more detailed, or more this part wasn't very helpful for me, but this part was. But if you could make this better, that would be great. So those kinds of little things, it's what gets us excited every week as well. Because if a customer complains about your product or service, it means that they care. They really want it to be better.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's the best gift that any business owner can get if someone complains.
Yes. Yeah. Based on my usage on Cliff AI again, I've noticed that Cliff AI often generates outputs that having persuasive or advisory tone. It's almost like a argumentative or normative article. So from a UX perspective, do you think this is one of your core product strategy, or is there any room for tone flexibility? What I mean by that is, we would like to introduce a feature like the writers can choose the writing style and tuning the tone of the article in the future that matching their own preference.
That's an interesting observation. Okay, so I think the interesting thing about Cleave is we never really intended, or we never gave it specific instructions to be argumentative or persuasive. Right. The way we actually did it was actually a modeling based on a lot of top performing content on LinkedIn, for example. So we would go through thousands of top performing or hundreds of thousands of top performing content and then identify, okay, what are the key elements here that needs to be brought in, for example, and then the model would be trained based on those.
Yes.
So it's interesting that if persuasive and argumentative writing became natural in that.
Yeah.
Because I can imagine, I can see why that might have happened.
Maybe I'm the weird one because if you have opportunity to have a look on my draft, right? Majority of my writing is related to opposite of the argumentative article, right?
Oh, really?
Because
okay.
I don't like to persuade someone.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, but yeah, I think in terms of tone flexibility and like all these things, I think that's a big area of focus for us as well. So we do want people to be able to create content that feels like them and is in the direction that they want to go as much as possible. So like, a big focus is on personalization and how can we create that level of flexibility. And there's a couple. We actually already just rolled out the tone selection within the settings section.
Oh, really?
Just recently. But we are also planning a bunch of other improvements to this, and the models are always improving. So, in the next couple of weeks, we should see, like, there will be a couple more releases as well. Yeah. But really good feedback, actually.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah. You didn't expect that feedback from this podcast, didn't you?
Yeah. You've really gone deep into the product. That's really cool.
Yeah. Well, I believe that product vision by the founder and the customer feedbacks both playing a crucial role on building a brilliant product. So I would like to ask, how do you manage to balancing both?
Yeah, so I think it's tricky. I think a lot of founders also share that you have to kind of like sometimes really ignore what the customers are telling you and build something in the direction that you believe in and have that sense of conviction. I think that's really hard, especially when there's so much self-doubt and you as a founder, you also feel like, am I even right? You have all those questions. But I think one thing that I found helpful is like when you're listening to customers when they're asking for things, like, oh, I wish you had this feature, or I wish you had this thing. Usually what helps me is if I ask them back first, like, okay, why do you want this? Like, what's the underlying motivation? So it's helpful to kind of understand deeply, like, okay, the customer asked for this feature, but actually what they really want is to solve this problem. And then you can think as the entrepreneur or as the founder, right? How can I solve this problem even better, right? So if the customer is saying, oh, I wish you had this feature or solution, right? That's kind of like, that's your job actually as the founder to figure out what is the right solution to build.
What I mean by that is, it's very important that when we want to fit in the process of filtering the feedbacks, right? Choose the ones that align with your product vision, correct?
Yeah, kind of. But I think, on that point, product vision can also change quite a lot. Because like sometimes I think the business vision doesn't really change, but the product vision can change. So for example, for our business vision, it's like really helping millions of people to share their ideas on the internet. Yeah. We want to create more, especially for example, in Malaysia, right? In the lawyer scene in Malaysia, like if I'm looking for specific advice about things like, legal things in the startup space in Malaysia, there's very few pieces of content that I can actually read to get help in this area, right? And one of my friends in this space is Wan Zakaria. He's been doing a great job of like posting content in the startup law space, right, on his blog. And that's actually been like super duper helpful. So what I see in the world is like there's still this gap where there's lots of content out there, but in the niches, right, there's not enough content. And for example, in different languages, there isn't enough content, right? In specifically helping, communities. Like for example, I'm from Sarawak, so if I'm looking for advice from Sarawakian founders or Sarawakian businesses, like it's very hard to find that online today. So I think as much as it seems like there's social media is very crowded and there's lots of content already, I think there's still lots of opportunity for more people to start creating content and still drive huge benefits to their own businesses too.
No, that's interesting. All right. What's the most unexpected way that someone has used Cliff AI that surprised you?
Oh, okay. I've got a specific story for this one. Like, I once met this customer
Right.
who calls Cleve babe.
Oh, why?
Because she uses it for like her emotional support.
Oh, right.
Because
I
we
know
have this
that one.
feature called Ask Me, right? And
Yes,
Ask
yes.
Me kind of like asks, it's kind of like having a chat where like, but it just asks you questions all the time. So for example, maybe I say today that, okay, I'm feeling somewhat discouraged because like I was dealing with a really difficult customer and it makes me kind of lose sight of what I'm building, for example, right? That's very specific. But yeah, like I think there's some interesting use cases with AI where it can actually be like quite a helpful thought assistant. And I use it this way sometimes, like as a therapist almost.
Oh,
Yeah. And it'll just ask me questions and then I would share my thoughts. Yeah.
What is the hardest decision you've made so far?
Oh, there's so many. Like I think in general, but I wouldn't say they're that difficult. I think it's generally like a product, like just determining what direction for the product to go in is generally quite hard because there's always so many options, and you're never 100% certain with product. Actually, you're hardly 60% certain most of the time. It's usually like a 51% that this is the likely direction. And I think that decision making is generally quite difficult in the early stages where there's so much uncertainty. But yeah, I think a bigger decision, I guess hardest decision so far has been actually deciding to start like a startup in the first place. Right, and foregoing, I guess there's an opportunity cost of like pursuing a career in corporate or something like that, and choosing the path that's like, you know, with corporate it's kind of clear. You know, you get your entry level job,
Yes.
then you get your promotion, then you get your next promotion. You work hard in these specific
Yes.
things, you do well. Yeah, you'll kind of climb up the ranks, and then there's a direction, which is nice, right?
Yes. But I hate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In my case, like it wasn't so much that I didn't want that. I think I would have still like been okay with that. But I was just curious about the startup path and the adventure in a sense. Like it was nice to have something that was uncertain and unknown. I was not a business student, right? I was
No.
like a very classic study hard engineering student, like just very, very much on track to doing a corporate career. Yeah, and this whole startup thing was quite random. And yeah, making the decision to just like, the way I thought about it was like, okay, when I was graduating, I was 22 years old. And at the time I was like, okay, you know what, I've got my whole life ahead of me. What if instead of going for the corporate job and going for the safety of, or going into engineering or consulting or something, what if I dedicated the next 5 years to trying out this startup thing? Because once you go into corporate, right, there's always the next promotion, the next stock options, the next opportunity, the next job application, right?
Yes.
And it's difficult to kind of resist the temptation of like of the next thing in corporate, right? The path is like quite nice.
Yes.
So I thought like, hey, you know what, let's spend the first 5 years like really experimenting, learning about the world, trying out startups, building businesses, and then seeing where that takes me. And if all else fails, then yeah, maybe I can go back into corporate. But for the time being, I think it's been quite interesting, and I'm not sure if I would go back right now. Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't agree anymore because, yeah, as you mentioned, it might be a very thoughtful decision. It might be a very thoughtful decision in our life that we put ourselves in the state where it is is around of the uncertainty of all that stuff. Yeah, because we might doing something that are not aligned with our identity at first, but once we just started, we could be more familiar on that kind of state.
True.
Yeah.
True.
I would like to ask for my curiosity about equity split. There's always a debate about equity split, whether the founders should split the equity evenly among the founders or should be based on the basis which the amount of responsibilities and the risk borne by the founders. So, seems both evocation can be true at the same time. May I ask about your thoughts on this?
Oh wow, interesting.
Yeah.
I think the way if all co-founders start at the same time, and you have like relatively, you're all invested at the same amount, like you're all going full time into the business, or you're all committing the same amount and stuff into the business. I think it should be almost 100% equal equity split. In our case, it's about 100% equal. Usually, the CEO or one person will have like 1% higher equity, just to make decision making. Like when there's a deadlock, then there's someone who can make a decision. So usually that's the CEO who gets like 1 extra percentage just to help with deadlock decisions. But most of the time, I think the general advice as well from like YC and other like accelerators is to try to have it relatively equal, if possible. I know there are some situations where like there's one co-founder who brings a lot of experience and specific things to the table, and then you have like some imbalances, and then I think it's every business is unique, so I wouldn't say this is a hard and fast rule, but like it was important for me that we were relatively equal partners in the business, or pretty much equal partners in the business, such that all three of us are also kind of like equally motivated to push the business forward. Yeah.
All right. So it means that it's determined by the nature, right? The nature of a business, because the fare might not equal to equal, correct?
Yeah, in some cases, I guess.
What is the fact that you didn't know about before launching Cliff AI that you wish you had to?
I mean, let's see.
I mean, some lesson or things that you didn't know before you're launching your startup, but you will realize it once you started it.
I think it can be harder, like like the journey of like getting your first 100 customers, for example, can be a lot longer and harder than you might initially expect. Like, especially in spaces where it's not so clear. Like with Cleave, right? It's not like a business which already existed before, and you're just disrupting it with new systems. And in general with AI, right? You're creating new things that the world hasn't really experienced, and then you're trying to build something that people want. And that can actually be really, really hard and like difficult to figure out what exactly to build, right? The upside, of course, is like, when you're working at the cutting edge, then growth and scaling can be really like there's big opportunities there. But then the downside, or the cons of this is like, it's really difficult to kind of imagine the future and figure out what is going to be the best use case of AI for content creation, or like for whatever niche that you're looking at. Yeah.
What is the best time to scale a team?
We've been actually holding back from scaling the team as much as possible. So until today, like we're a year into the journey, we're still a team of 3. And even though technically our capital and revenues could support more people, we intentionally keep it as lean as possible for now. We are currently hiring a full-time engineer and stuff, but we only recently made that decision to actually start hiring. And I think it's actually pretty important, for as long as you can, to not hire. And this is something that I learned from my previous business as well, but it's also something that's generally shared in the entrepreneurship community. But like, if like, especially now with AI, there's like lots of things that you can do with the right tools, and like, and you can do really quickly. But I think the biggest reason is like, the more people that you add, it's good to do it when you have a certain level of certainty in the business. right? Like the business is already growing at a certain rate, and you know that this is a product. Because the more people you have, the harder it is to kind of like make big changes and pivot quickly, right? So it's a lot of the features that you ask people to build, for example, if you hire an engineer, a lot of those features might just change by the time like they actually half built it, right? And it can be quite frustrating. So in the early days, I would highly recommend just like being very adaptable and having a lean team such that, if you need to make corrections or adjustments, you can quite quickly test a bunch of different things, throw it out into the world. You can all like crash at one of the co-founders' houses and like build until 12 a.m. and like nobody complains. And you have that early stage experimentation, which you can only really do with a very small team. Yeah, and that's one of the biggest strengths of startups actually at the early stage. So I know there's a lot of like general there's this feeling that, I want to build a big team, I want to build a big business, and hire lots of people. But if you do that too quickly, as I also did with my previous agency, it can be quite difficult to manage, especially when you're scaling people too fast. Yeah.
All right.
Actually, one more thing to add to this is now with AI startups, right? What is like, it's become quite different. Usually, like in the past, right? For a 100 million revenue company, you definitely need to have at least 1,000 people running the business, right? Recently, there's this tool called Cursor, which is like an AI copilot for coding.
Yes.
And they've hit 100 million annual recurring revenue at 20 people.
Wow.
Right. And there are many other cases like this, I think, where companies are hitting 10 million annual recurring revenue, 20 million with like 5, 6, 10 people, 20 people. It's becoming really common. Well, not really common, but more common now, especially with AI and with agents and with all these kinds of things, especially and with a lean team. And with social media, right? And the viral effects that can come from it. There's lots of opportunity for small teams. So I would highly recommend be very, very strict with your hiring criteria. Like hire only the best people, and don't like lower your talent bar in the company. So take your time to hire, but and keep the talent density strong. Yeah.
I love how you take Cursor as an example. Vibe coding is prevailing now. Yeah. I wanted to discuss about scaling the startup business overseas, because I always been skeptical that whether the local founder, for those who are in their early stage, whether they should orientated on building strong traction in the local market versus cultivating the kind of mindset to scaling startup to the overseas should be done from the first day. So may I ask, what is your playbook for scaling business to overseas, since I've observed that Cliff AI has a good reputation from overseas users so far?
Okay, number one, I think it's based on the kind of businesses that you have, right? There are lots of businesses that like start in Malaysia, and they're very like B2B focused. There's very specific decision makers in Malaysia that you need to target. I know many founders who are in that space and they're doing great, right? They start and scale in Malaysia and then they expand overseas, right? And I think especially in B2B or in hardware or in specific kind of spaces, then that starting local and stuff makes sense. In our case, because we're more consumer oriented in a way, so you can really start a business anywhere. And it doesn't matter whether you're in Romania or Italy or Paraguay or in Malaysia. Just focus on building a good product and then trying to get it out there. And I've met some people who would ask me "Oh, you're starting a business, like a startup in Malaysia in generative AI, and you're trying to target global customers. Are you crazy? Why would a Malaysian company succeed when you're competing against companies in Silicon Valley and stuff, right?" And my response to that is honestly, at the end of the day, we are all just humans, and if some guy in Silicon Valley can figure out how to build a great product in this space, then so should we. You know, there's really no difference whether you're in Malaysia, whether you're in fact, in Malaysia, I think we actually have a lot of advantages because we have this multicultural society. We have the advantage, Singapore as well, right? We have the advantage of being able to understand the nuances of Chinese culture, Indian culture, Malay culture, which translates to Indonesian culture as well, right? In a way. So we're actually really able to build very products which are geared more towards the international markets, right? And I think that's where like a lot of our product focus, for example, hasn't been fully targeting English-speaking users primarily. So we have a lot of users who are from Brazil, who are from Spain, from Finland, and they're using Cleave in their own languages. And we made sure that a lot of our AI features and a lot of our systems are designed to cope with multilingual, right? And that's also as a result of like our own team diversity, for example. And I think that's the cool thing about Malaysia, right? So I would say, especially in the next couple of years, when we're building, when in generative AI, when we're trying to build products for the world, I think places like Malaysia have a pretty unique unfair advantage where, for example, our major races are like Malay, Chinese, and Indian, right? And then there's so many more as well. All of us kind of, like many of us speak fluent English, and like we're also able to understand the Western markets. And then Malay corresponds to Indonesia as well, which is one of the biggest markets in the world. Chinese allows us to understand and penetrate the Chinese markets as well, which is, a billion, like more than a billion people, almost 2 billion, I think. And then India also allows us to penetrate the Indian markets, right, which is also another billion people. So loads of major markets, and also there are so many of us in Malaysia that actually speak like foreign languages. I speak German as well, because we're just like so used to learning different languages. And learning different cultures and stuff, and I think that's what makes us like really stand out. And I think if we really wanted to, I think we could build like a really powerful global hub of technology and software development and AI here. Yeah.
Oh, that's quite insightful sharing about your perception about the Malaysian startup environment might become the advantage for local founders. I heard debates about the environment to build a successful tech companies often, and a major ecosystem like Silicon Valley always be the first suggestion and first choice as well by the founders. At a certain point, I do believe that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we would like to discuss about what is the cons of, because you're touching about the pros to building startup in Malaysia, right? What is the cons that Malaysia facing recently in order to build a successful, brilliant startup products?
I think there are, in Silicon Valley, you have the investor community, you have the former founders who have exited, and then they become like, they have a very strong, at least what I've heard, they have a very strong mentorship culture. So even after the founder exits, they're very willing to angel invest, to like talk to younger founders earlier in their journey and share very openly, try to help the community as well. So I think that's something that we're starting to see happen. I mean, we do get in Malaysia, which I'm very grateful for. We're starting to have a closer community, but right now I do feel like it's still quite fragmented, and the scene is still developing. Right, we're still in relatively early stages. I do think it's going to improve a lot in the coming couple of years, especially in this era. Like over the next couple of years, I think it's going to be very exciting, because I think the general advantages that US has had for the last couple of years is slowly changing as well, and I think there's a lot of pretty good push from local communities in Malaysia, and I think over the next couple of years we'll see a lot more young founders starting businesses. We've got very strong determination and entrepreneurship drive in Malaysia, so I'm very excited to see a lot more people start businesses within AI, for example, and learn from each other, build together, and create a better ecosystem too. Also, more podcasters like you, it would be very helpful to create more content like this, right, in the Malaysian media.
I take it as a compliment. Thank you very much. As we can see, the enhancement of generative AI in the sense of efficiency has led to the paradigm shift and redefined the meaning of work and life, where we get more and more people are likely to dive into the creator economy or so-called passion economy. From that, how will we see the future of passion economy, and how we going to let Cliff AI growth align with it?
I think generally it's quite exciting to see more people sharing, creating businesses or creating, even creator-based businesses where they're just sharing their knowledge and creating value in that way. I think this is definitely, there's a lot more opportunity. I think we're just at the start of what's possible. Like every time there's a new creator that comes up, you kind of see the rate at which someone can grow just continuously increases. We're seeing shorter and shorter times where people are going from like 0 to 100,000 followers or 1 million followers. And I think there's just more and more opportunity. Yeah, but I think generally the underlying thing that I'm thinking about is it's just quite nice that there's the big niches will be taken up quite quickly. But I think where the opportunities will largely be is in the sub niches. So for example, law in general, becoming a law content creator will be quite hard pretty soon, because there will be some established people who are already posting lots of content to that space. But if you talk about law in Malaysia or law in Sarawak, then you have very specific opportunity to become a thought leader in that space. Right. So talk about things which are slightly more niche, which you are very well versed in. And I think that there's still going to be lots of opportunity for that kind of content.
Yeah, it's very fascinating that there are so many content creators that we can find out in the social media, and I feel sort of like if you want to dive yourself into the creator economies, you need to consider yourself as a startup business.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like what is the contents that you want to create, and that might be equal to what is the industry that you want to dive into when you want to build a startup, and how you going to build traction and so on is most likely to running a startup. Yeah, so there's a trend. This is quite cool because the nature of startup has can be applied. I mean, we can see this kind of the startup nature in creators economy.
Yeah, I totally agree.
This become a trend.
Yeah.
At a certain point, Malaysia often struggles with a lack of investment from VC in local tech companies. And I found out an interesting pattern in the Malaysia funding data that showing that the VC funding is heavily relying on the growth stage of companies rather than the firms that in the earlier stages. So do you think this is due to a perception among both local and VC firms that the probability of high innovating tech companies emerging from Malaysia is relatively low?
Wow, you've done really good research on this. That's something that I wouldn't have known a year ago.
I should. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. But that there is definitely quite a lot of truth to that. I think relative to other more mature startup ecosystems, there's generally a lot more VCs and people investing in the earlier stages of the company. Whether that means that, I know a lot of founders who have also just for their seed round or for their Series A, they just raised from a foreign investor, and you can basically do that. I think just take other people's money, spend in Malaysia, build a team, contribute to the local economy. I think that's cool. But I think there's still there is some gaps in there, and I think it's one of those things that we need more case studies of successful businesses to drive more investors to invest in earlier stages and belief in Malaysian startups. And there is generally a branding problem as well to an extent about startups in Malaysia, which I don't really fully understand, but I think that's changing. I think the internet changes everything, and I think over the next and social media, and I think I'm still generally very optimistic, but I don't think that should discourage too many startups. And also, I think in the last 1 to 2 years, like the VC that invested in us is Antler, and like they only focus on like super early stage, like day zero startups basically, and they're also like there's a lot of government drive to spurring the local startup economy and startup industry. So yeah, I think it's trending towards like a strong positive. So I'm quite optimistic.
Yeah, quite insightful. One last question before we're wrapping up the conversation. What is your advice to our local founders that planning to start from the ground?
I think the hardest thing with creating anything really, whether it's a startup or whether it's a podcast or whether it's a YouTube channel or your own brand on LinkedIn or somewhere else, right? I think is believing in yourself and like having like really understanding yourself, like why do you want to do this, and taking the time to really think that through. I think it's important to have that really strong and clear grounding when doing anything really. Yeah, and you'll always tend to come back to that, and it'll always change, right? So your why when you start a journey or start an adventure will change over the course of the adventure, and that's okay. But it's good to keep that in mind while you're building. But also, yeah, generally have confidence in your capabilities, and even when things go bad or things don't go as well as expected, you may not feel like you're making the right kind of progress, and it'll affect your own confidence in yourself the most, right? Because like, oh, why isn't this working? Like, why am I not getting the results that I was hoping I would get? But yeah, it's important to just remember that it's a lot of these things like startups and stuff is really hard. Even creating content, right? Like becoming an influencer is really, really hard. And we can only just try our best. Yeah. But also believe in ourselves, because even the ones who are successful feel exactly the same way.
Wow. This might be such very useful advice to our local founders, and I hope they are listening to this podcast. Yeah. Right, man. I'm so enjoying doing this, and it is such fascinating to have a live conversation with you. Much appreciated on the collaboration again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.
Yeah, thank you.